Hello everyone, welcome to your lecture on gender and empowerment. This lecture is a part of your paper on gender, media and society. This lecture will help you understand the concept of empowerment. Empowerment is one of the most oft quoted terms in literature pertaining to both development studies as well as gender studies. The origin of this concept can be traced back to the era of 1960s. Later in 1985, the term further acquired considerable mass during the prevalent women's movements in the Caribbean and Latin America, besides the feminist movements. Throughout these movements and campaigns, the concept of empowerment came to signify, firstly, acquiring power through intrinsic strengthening of self-respect and self-conviction, secondly, to be able to exercise choice in and control over everyday lives, and thirdly, the power to transform gender relations in different domains of life, that is financial, political, lawful, socio-cultural, according to the Commission on Women and Development to 2007. Conceptualizing empowerment. Since the Beijing Declaration in 1995, the use of the concept of empowerment proliferated in development discourse. Several development agencies tried to define and measure empowerment in terms of quantitative parameters such as education, income, political participation, etc. For instance, one of the 8 Millennium Development Goals proposed by the United Nations Development Programme is the accomplishment of gender equality in women's empowerment. In order to monitor the progress in achieving this goal, it puts forth 3 indicators. Number 1, share of girls to boys in primary education as well as secondary and tertiary teaching. Number 2, women's share in paid work in the non-agricultural sector. And number 3, amount of positions or seats held by the women nationwide in the legislature. Evidently, education, wage work and political participation among women have been construed as the main indicators of empowerment by the UNDP. Unfortunately, such a quantitative approach to measure empowerment tends to reduce the scope of the concept of empowerment, according to the Commission on Women and Development in 2007. The noted scholar Naila Kabir in 2005 showed that paid work does not necessarily transpire to empowerment. This is because most often women join the labor force out of economic compulsions, work in the informal sector under exploitative conditions, and also receive unequal wages vis-a-vis men. Undertaking such kinds of work only intensifies their double burden. In spite of their increased contribution into paid work, women, mostly the married women, either bear the main burden of household work or share it with their daughters, who are then forced to withdraw from schools or educational institutions and become the primary caregivers of their families. Wage work undertaken under such stressful conditions can hardly enhance women's activity and options and life choices. The role of education in enhancing the cognitive ability, self-esteem, and power for critical thinking, besides imparting knowledge, information, etc., is too self-evident to obviate the need for further explanation. It also catalyzes alterations in authority relationships or power relationships inside as well as outside the family, enable women to fight against domestic violence and negotiate with the outer world with self-confidence. Yet, access to education does not unequivocally translate to empowerment. Benefits of education are most often seen in terms of instrumental rather than intrinsic value for women. That is, the girls and women should be educated not because of their own personal well-being, but because of the welfare of the family. Educated women are more likely to bear fewer and healthier children. Where women's role in the society is defined purely in reproductive terms, education is seen in terms of equipping girls to be better wives and mothers, or increasing their chances of getting a suitable husband, as was said by Naila Kabir in 2005. Besides, gender-based dissimilarities are often repeated within the education structure. The curricula reinforces the gender stereotypes, lack of adequate infrastructure such as girls' toilets, lady teachers in school, etc., to attract and retain girl students, provision for imparting vocational training to women in typically feminine tasks such as tailoring, sewing, basket weaving, etc. In the context of political representations also, there are conspicuous gender biases. Not only are the women underrepresented in major decision-making roles in the political institutions, but also the political culture in which they operate is not at all conducive for women's active participation in politics. Several studies, in fact, have observed that most often the women leaders located in power positions of local self-governance, such as the panchayats, for example, voice the opinions of their spouses or other male relatives of the family. That said, the education, employment and political participation become mere rhetoric in the discourse of empowerment. According to Naila Kabir, the notion of empowerment must look beyond quantitative aspects and question the deeper social structures, the role played by both men and women in influencing development policies, and also the operation of power and conflict. Economic empowerment. Economic empowerment is a multifaceted concept and is anchored in the socio-cultural perspective of gender. What works in a given context may not be effective in an altered scenario. Golla et al. In 2010 provided a listing of illustrative indicators which can be implemented to assess women's economic empowerment. Process indicators, which mainly comprise of the manner in which the participation of individual women in the project of intervention is solicited, how the community and the family responds to women's participation, the extent to which women could successfully learn and implement the project activities, positive and negative outcomes of participation. Next, power and agency indicators, which basically deal with control over assets, participation in decision making in the context of spending income, making large purchases for the household, personal mobility, use of media, phone, technology, etc., building of self-confidence, self-esteem and psychological well-being, ability to negotiate, constraining gender norms and gender roles and responsibilities. Next, economic advancement indicators, which focus on productivity, skills, access to income, productivity assets, savings, availability of safe working environment with decent working conditions, etc. Power. The concept of power is an important premise in the concept of empowerment, and the most seminal contribution in this concept has come from Michel Foucault. He argues that power is not a monolithically dominant phenomenon, rather there are multiplicities of powers. For instance, while men control over women is a well established feature of patriarchal societies, it is sometimes overlooked that even women exert power over other women and also men who are located in a less privileged position in the society. Thus, empowerment can be defined as the process to acquire power both independently and cooperatively. Foucault's conceptualization of power has been interpreted and reinterpreted by number of feminists, development scholars as well as practitioners, and 4 stages of power have been identified. The concept of power over one's personal life and taking the power to exercise choice is intrinsic to the concept of empowerment. Thus, it entails not only quote unquote power to, but also quote unquote power within and quote unquote power with. In other words, empowerment does not merely refer to explicit manifestation of progress one makes, but also the changes within, entailing better self-esteem and self-efficacy. It is a process which marks a progression from a powerless, disadvantageous state of being to that of equity and equality. Naila Kabir states that empowerment denotes the process by which those who have been denied the ability to make choices acquire such an ability. the concept of empowerment underscores three important dimensions which are intricately interrelated. These are agency, resources, and achievements. Agency. The idea of agency is central to empowerment. Agency represents the processes by which choices are made and put into effect, according to Kabir in 2005. If women experience progressive changes in their lives not as a result of their own agencies but as passive recipients of benefits accruing from development interventions, it does not indicate empowerment. Resources are the channels through which actions are implemented, and achievements denote the consequences of action. Thus, action has both optimistic and destructive implications. In the optimistic sense of the term, it signifies control too, that is, the people's ability to make and act on their own life choices even in the face of others' oppositions, according to Kabir. In the negative sense, it represents control over, which implies the capacity of some actors to override the agency of others through, for example, the exercise of authority or the use of violence and other forms of coercion, as observed by Naila Kabir. In the context of emancipation, agency does not merely signify ability to exercise choice, but also that such choice must challenge the existing gendered power relations. In this sense then, empowerment entails development of a sense of self-agency and self-worth, that is, how individuals perceive themselves vis-a-vis the others. Empowerment is ingrained upon how people perceive themselves and their sense of positive self-image. Resources. The second important dimension of empowerment are the assets, which are basically the channels via which action is operationalized. It needs to be mentioned here that resources are not indicators of empowerment. Rather, these acts as catalysts for empowerment or conditions under which empowerment is likely to occur, as mentioned by Malhotra et al. 2002, page 8. According to Kabir in 2005, resources are distributed in our society through diverse social institutions and social relationships. In the context of the social institutions, some individuals, that is, the household heads, the tribal chiefs, etc., may be located in a more privileged position, having better access to resources. This is because by dint of their superior position within the social institutions, they manage to define the priorities, interpret the norms and conventions, enforce claims, and defines the terms of accessing resources. Women, being rarely located in such privileged positions within the social institutions, mostly have limited capacity to make strategic choices. Achievements. Achievements are the third dimension to empowerment. These entail the extent to which individuals are able to lead the life of their choices. It is important to explicitly define what counts as achievements. While many may consider women's participation in wage work as an important indicator of their empowerment, however, the condition in which such work is undertaken is extremely important. Paid work performed to meet the basic needs may hardly be considered as empowering, vis-a-vis those work undertaken for self-esteem. It is important to remember that these three dimensions, agency, resources and achievements, are not indicators of empowerment. Actually, these represent the different pathways through which the process of empowerment can be operationalized. Moreover, the concept of choice is of intrinsic importance to that of the concept of empowerment. According to Naila Kabir in 2005, ability to exercise choice mandates the availability of alternatives such that the choice could have been made differently as well. In the absence of alternatives, what appears to be an act of choosing is actually based in compulsion due to the lack of choice. For example, often women seem to accept and sometimes even endorse their lesser assertion or claim on family resources or receiving domestic violence because they have internalized their subordinate position in a patriarchal society so well that they do fail to think otherwise. Their acceptance of, say, domestic violence or little access to household resources might be interpreted as reflecting their quote-unquote choice. However, according to Kabir in 2005, such choices are really based on the denial of choice. It is very important to mention here that all choices are not of equal relevance in the description of power. Some are more noteworthy than others due to their strategic significances for public life. 4 stages of empowerment. An attempt to identify a conceptual framework that links empowerment to the underlying determinants on the one hand and the development outcomes on the other hand, Narayan in 2005 highlights 4 features. Firstly, empowerment takes place as a result of communication between persons and their settings at different stages. In this sense, it is a relational concept. Secondly, the power and voice of an individual woman not only depends on herself but also on her location within a particular community or group. Thus, measuring empowerment must take into consideration the assets and capabilities at the individual as well as the collective level. Thirdly, empowerment involves both top-down changes in institutions and organizational processes as well as bottom-up changes in the people's organizations, networks and assets. According to Narayan in 2005, page 6. Finally, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all policy for empowering women. These policies and interventions will depend on the constraints, barriers and desired outcomes in particular contexts as observed by Narayan in 2005, page 6. In order to understand the process as to how to empower women, we require an analysis of how gender overlaps with membership in other disadvantageous groups of women's roles and functions in specific contexts and of formal and informal institutions that support patriarchal structures that are barriers to women's freedom, according to Kogel in 2006. Measuring empowerment. Different scholars and practitioners have used multiple indicators to measure empowerment, which have been synthesized by Malhotra et al. In 2002. These include economic dimension, encircling females' access to land and other resources, domination or control over income and other family assets, relative contribution to family support, access to credit, access to markets, etc. Next, socio-cultural dimension includes equal treatment of women and girls in the household, freedom of mobility, access to social institutions, modern transportation, partaking in non-kin founded groups and networks, representative depiction of women in ceremonies, etc. Next, ancestral or interpersonal. Exercise of choice and decision making in marriage reproductive matters such as sexual relations, childbearing, contraception, abortion, etc. Freedom from domestic violence, abolition of dowry, etc. Next, legal dimension includes awareness about legal rights, support for existing rights both at the household and community level, effective imposition of lawful rights, etc. Next, political dimension includes knowledge of political structure, household structure for free political participation, women's involvement in local political institutions, etc. Psychological dimension includes self-esteem, psychological well-being, collective awareness of injustices, etc. Challenges to measuring empowerment. One chief difficulty in determining empowerment is that it is context specific. That is, the attitudes, practices and behaviors that signify empowerment vary from one context to another, both at the individual and community level. For example, in Kerala in India, it may not be as empowering for women to get permission to attend educational institutions because of the overall high levels of female literacy prevailing in the state of Kerala. However, the same could be an extremely empowering act in, say, the state of Bihar, where female literacy rates are one of the lowest in the country. Empowerment as a process. Many authors interpret empowerment as a process as opposed to empowerment as a condition or a state of being. That process is much more difficult to measure than an outcome needs no further explanation. As a process, empowerment cannot be measured directly with the standard tools of the social scientists. However, indirectly, the process of empowerment can be measured through certain proxy variables like well-being, educational status, awareness, according to Eckerle in 1995. According to Kishore in 2000, the process can be measured only through measures of decision making, control, choice, etc., because these help in measuring agency. Naila Kabir in 1997 and 1998 observes that measuring empowerment as a process is also subjective, not only in terms of the perceptions of the evaluators or the researchers, but also concerning the women's individual understanding. Thus, rather than relying on what is valued by the evaluators of programs, the process of empowerment should be judged as having occurred if it is self-assessed and validated by women themselves, according to Malhotra et al. In 2002, page 19. Conclusion. Summing up this lecture, we observe how empowerment has been conceptualized and the difficulties associated with measuring the same. We also looked at the factors that influence empowerment as well as ways of measuring the concept of empowerment. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. For more details, please read the e-text of this lecture properly and attend the questions in the end. Thank you.